Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Dear listener, I hope you're all well. I'm not going to stick around too long as this special episode is being hosted by my two dear friends and fellow researchers and experiencers, Claire Casely and Kate Ray. Thanks to them, you're about to listen to a fantastic conversation about pixies, as Claire lives in Devon, and gnomes, which Kate Ray knows very well from her hometown of Nottingham. Now, many of you will know Claire from my previous interview with her. She is host of the Fairy Whispering podcast, which explores fairies and other supernatural topics. As I said, Claire is a fellow fairy experiencer, a fairy artist, and is currently writing a book about the pixies. She is passionate about connecting people with nature, wonder, and well-being through her creative and fairy work. And you can find her at fairywhisperer with an fae.co.uk. And again, many of you will have listened to my interview with Kate Ray, host of Hare in the Hawthorn podcast on YouTube, alongside Dr. Neil Rushton, in which they discuss many supernatural topics. Kate is also a fairy experiencer, paranormal investigator, author, writer for Haunted magazine, and member of the Fairy Investigation Society. She has featured on TV and radio and contributed a chapter to a book about the case of the Woollerton Gnomes, speaking of which she has just recently released her own fictional book, Woolly Snots, The Curious Case of the Woollerton Gnomes, about the Woollerton Gnomes case from the perspective of the gnomes. So you can catch Kate on YouTube at Hare in the Hawthorn. I am currently taking some time off during the summer for childcare and writing my book. But I will still be creating fortnightly bonus episodes for my supporters as usual on Patreon, and we are continuing with our monthly Zoom chats. This month, on 22nd of August, we have storyteller Owen Staten from Time Between Times and Spectre of the Sea podcasts for a Q&A, a good old chat, and he's also going to treat us to a story. Plus, we have 2 tea ceremonies coming up with Todd Grube in August. This is an ancient form of shamanic meditation practice from South China, which uses the plant medicine Camellia sinensis, otherwise known as tea. These teas have been used by shamans, healers, and Taoist practitioners for around 20,000 years as a tool to communicate with gods, fae, elementals, guides, and power animals, as Todd describes. He says that these medicines help open us to receive messages and even communicate with different fae and light beings. The tickets are £25 and available on Eventbrite. The links are in the show notes. This event is open to anybody, though supporters on my Patreon receive 20% off the workshop price. We have 2 dates coming up for these workshops. There is one on the 12th of August, Saturday 12th of August at 4 p.m. until 5:30 BST. So hopefully that should suit people in the UK and also in America in most places. And then we also are running another one on Saturday the 19th of August at 9 a.m. until 10:30 BST. And that is geared towards our Patreon members who are in Australia and New Zealand. But anybody is welcome to come along to that. And actually last time, the morning one, it was just a load of Brits that filled that time slot in the morning. It's a great way to start the day. The links for those events will be on my show notes at scarletofthefae.com. I am also still taking healing appointments over the summer. I am a chakra healer, for those of you that don't know, and I use the body mirror system, which I've been using since 2005, but I've been healing for many, many more years before that time. You can find out more about my healing appointments on my website at scarletofthefae.com. That's Scarlet with 2 T's. In the meantime, huge thanks to my Patreon supporters who are an amazing bunch of people that I feel very grateful for in my life and without whom the project wouldn't exist. It's been a very strange year for me, as it has for many people, and I have really felt their friendship and loving support at every turn. If you want to contact me, I'm at scarletofthefae@gmail.com. That again, Scarlet with 2 T's. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at _remain_curious, as well as the YouTube channel, where I'll be uploading the original audio episodes as I get time. Please make sure you subscribe there and share the episodes with friends. I hope you have a wonderful summer, and I look forward to joining with you again on 3rd of September for the new series with some exciting new guests and more fascinating shares of modern fairy sightings. Big love to you all, and thank you for listening. And until our new episodes begin in September, always remain curious. Time to
Hello, welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm Claire Casely.
I'm Kate Ray.
And we're standing in for Jo at the moment because she's been kidnapped by fairies.
They've taken her away, and in her place, they've left us. More fool Jo for leaving this open. That's all I can say. I've got a feeling that I've just been saying to Claire about, I feel like a school kid that's been given a project that's probably a little too much out of their league. So all kinds of shenanigans may happen during doing this. So apologies to start off with.
Yeah, and before we introduce what we're going to talk about, which is probably got a clue from Kate's T-shirt, some of what we're going to talk about today, just give ourselves a brief little intro. So I have a podcast called Fairy Whispering and a group on Facebook called Fairy Whispering, and that's where all this started, really. Had my group, and that led to the podcast. And I'm also a fairy experiencer. I've been on Kate's Hair in the Hawthorn podcast, and I've been on interviewed by Jo as well on Modern Fairy Sightings.
So I've also got a podcast on YouTube, Hair in the Hawthorn. I can add to the long list of titles, which is ridiculous, but titles such as Investigator, Reader, and now on top of it I can add Author, which is a bit of a buzz.
Healing has helped me many times in my life when I'd reached a point where something needed to change. In 2005, I trained with Martin Brofman to learn the body mirror system of healing, which was life-changing for me. It's based on the idea that the parts of your body that don't work well reflect the parts of your life that don't work well, and about which you have tension in your consciousness. The understanding is that tension is stress, and stress causes symptoms. In a distance healing or in-person session, I move up the chakras, returning each one to wholeness using a colour map. During the process, I see images and situations, I hear words or receive impressions that tell me something about what caused the tension in that person's life. The feedback at the end of the session is a really big part of the healing. If you're interested in a chakra healing session, you can contact me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com.
Yes. Oh, yeah, it's Author. You've got your book, which we were just talking about, which I have a copy of here, a signed copy, Willie Snops, The Curious Case of the Wollerton Gnomes, which is brilliant. I've been having a little read over the last couple of days, and it's very heartwarming, funny. I've had some laugh out loud moments. It's beautiful, beautiful book, Kate. Yeah, lovely.
And that's another clue of one of the things we're going to be talking about.
Yes. So, need to mention I'm an artist as well. I'm a fairy artist. I've got some of my fairy art with me today. I have time to show that to illustrate what we're talking about. So what are we talking about today, Kate?
So we were jokingly saying that we were going to have a top trump scenario. Obviously, I'm Team Gnome,
Mm-hmm.
and you were going to do Team Pixie, and we were going to look
Yes.
at the sort of similarities, the differences, and sort of get into a conversation about, hey, pixies. And I actually, when I started out on my fairy journey, I always felt as though I was of pixie ilk. So I'm more prone to that kind of shenanigans, that kind of energy. And the fairy world seemed to have, like you, I'm an experiencer, the fairy world seemed to have a very different line for me to go down, which was the gnomes, which is a really earthy energy. So, you know, a different kind of energetic vibe to them. So shall we start with that? About give us a brief overview of because you've been doing a lot of research on pixies.
My goodness,
So,
yeah.
in a nutshell, what's a pixie? Can you put it in a nutshell?
Right. Difficult. So it is the coverall term for for fairies in the southwest. In Cornwall, they're called piskies. Some people call them piskies in Devon, but they've come to be known as pixies in Devon, in Somerset, even as far up to the New Forest. There are pixies in the New Forest, and so it's hard to pin them down. Really, I've got an idea of what a pixie is from my experience of them, but you know, some people might see a winged fairy and say, "Oh, that's a pixie." So, yeah, in general, in Devon, pixies and traditional fairies have always been seen as separate beings and at war with each other in some cases as well. So, like the fairies and the pixies don't get on. But I go with the notion that it's a coverall term for fairies in this part of the world. And my experience of pixies and the traditional description of them has been very sort of earthy beings either dressed in very earthy colours, browns and greens, sometimes like this. It's a little model of a pixie I encountered. Or seen in sort of bright colours like reds and greens and blues, the more sort of traditional colours of gnomes as well that in the garden. So yeah, that's a brief kind of synopsis of
It's always the way whenever we talk about fairies in whatever context, it is mercurial. It's like this ever-changing, evolving, mercurial lava lampy type effect that goes off. It's, you know, it's like when you think you've grasped an element of it or an understanding, something else will come along into that mix and go, no. You know, that's not what it's about. That's not what it means. And, you know, partly that's to do with, I suppose, you know, different colloquial traditions and terminology that occurs. For me, as a pixie in the Midlands, a pixie is a specific. This is how I understand pixie, and I because they were a separate entity from the winged beings. And for me, in my mind, a pixie is very much, if anybody's watched Erwin Saunders' work on YouTube, I'm a massive fan. They are very much like that sort of, not quite goblin, prettier than goblin, sort of very tribal looking, like you say, with very sort of earthy, almost an animistic nature to them, and they have got that real trickster character. But it's like when you go into the southwest, that we have this coverall, don't we? Of it just means anything from that ethereal realm that's coming through. So it's like you try to put this down, and it just shifts as soon as you do, doesn't it?
It's really difficult to pin down, and there's people that I've had some guests on my show this year, and spoken to at least a couple of people with gnome experiences, and a lady I spoke to from Somerset who had childhood experience in Devon with what she called pixies, but she said, "Oh, but they could be gnomes." So, like you say, it's a difficult thing for people to try and understand in their minds.
And I mean, if you throw that into the mix, that we are actually dealing with shapeshifters, we could be dealing with, beings that transpose themselves in a way that, or project themselves in a way that is related to a job that they do, or related to the place that they live, or it could be that they transmit themselves in a way that we can understand them and take them on board. It becomes even more of this like soup of, what is in this soup. I mean, in terms of traditional, what we know as traditional gnomes, again, that is when you look into the history of gnomes and where they've come from and how they've developed, it's crazy. It's like it's chasing mist. I mean, there is obviously the pinpoint of the alchemist Paracelsus in the 16th century, and he's meant to have coined the phrase gnomes from the Italian. Can't remember what the word is. From the word which means earth dweller. But can we say that was solely him that came up with that, and solely him, and he didn't absorb that within his lexicon of what these creatures were? And then you kind of trace them forward from there, and they become very Scandinavian, very Germanic, their habits, etc., become this very quintessential, typical gnome, which then kind of butts onto Santa's elves, which are very traditional gnome. Yes. So you've got the elves and the gnomes sort of crossing over. But when you look at gnomes outside of that traditional sense, they are very pixie-like, because the places they live, their jobs, their nature. So it's how do you even begin to pick this apart? It is.
Yeah, it's difficult. And so one of the defining things about pixies is that there are supposed to be these helpful pixies that help people in their homes, which in other parts of the world or the UK, they're called brownies and various other things, or hobs. And they help with chores, they help with farm animals, help with weaving, all those kinds of things. And I just wonder, do gnomes help around the house, or?
Apparently so, but I think that one of the characteristics that do define them differently to other fae is they are quite purposefully aloof with humans and human interaction. Right. They will advise and take on roles within the human realm if they feel as though that is for the good of nature and for the good of the environment. So they will give advice to farmers, they will help out with farm animals. I think the other real kind of thing that stands out in my mind between the gnomes and the pixies is the pixies can have a trickster to malevolent character about them.
Yeah.
The gnomes don't seem to, but they tend not to act on that, or from what I've been sort of reading and searching around at, they tend not to have any retribution or any comeback to humans. They would rather just distance themselves and sort of take themselves off into the wilderness, if you like. Whereas pixies, pixies will plait hair, they'll scratch, they'll bite, they'll give, they'll do all those kind of things. So
they're very, they are mischievous. And I was talking to a fairy artist the other day. I hope that I can have her on to interview her. She's a lady that's drawn fairies all of her life, very psychic person, beautiful artwork. She's never formally been formally trained, gone to art college. It's just something she's always enjoyed doing. was talking to her for a couple of hours, and she was telling me about this woodland on Dartmoor. I won't mention the name because it is a protected place. And she had this experience with a couple of what she described as pixies. She described the male pixie. She said they were, the male pixie was very angry with humans. And the female pixie, she was telepathically communicating with this woman, and she was upset as well about the way that humans are treating nature and the world. This particular woodland has been, some of it's been shut off now, I think, or it's become more protected since lockdown, and lots of people have been going and taking the moss from the trees and things. So this is where I had my fairy experience, and listening to this woman we'd never met before, her description of the pixie that she saw, the male pixie, is the same as the pixie that I saw, encountered, and I've got my picture of him here. I know I've shown this on your show, but this is the initial picture I did of this pixie. She described him as very old, very wrinkly faced, brown skin, brown clothing. See that? And when I encountered him, it was a telepathic thing. I didn't sort of visually see him until later. The image of him came to me. He didn't want me to go into the wood until I cleared up some rubbish outside the wood. So he was stood on this big standing stone, and I didn't see him, but this is how I've drawn him, pointing at this rubbish. And once I cleared it, he said, yes, you can come in now. So they are, and this woman who I've never met had exactly the same sort of interaction where they were saying, fed up of people trashing the place, basically. And so it's amazing, isn't it, once you have these confirmations from other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, pixies don't mess with them, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely get that. I definitely get the vibe that a pixie will come after you with a bow and arrow, but a gnome won't bother. It's too much hassle. We were talking just before we started recording, though, weren't we, about this raising consciousness, and how there is a growing number of people who are tapping into or being tapped into by the fairy realm, and really having a yearning for a connection with the fairy realm, and a deeper understanding and a clearer understanding of the fairy realm. And we were just chatting about why that may be, and part of it is exactly what you've just said. It's about our desire and a growing desire for a yearning back to the natural environment and the respect that comes with that. And that definitely comes through both Pixie, from your encounter, from that lady's encounter, and also, the gnomes very specifically are about, they have a seamless relationship with their environment, and with animals and with plants, and with the soil and with stone, and that is their only focus. And we also chatted as well about how that goes into certainly with the gnomes, there is a very, very heavy emphasis on tradition and traditional families and traditional crafts. And I know this is not a topic in today's age that people want to do much, but there is, I think, within us all a wanting to get back, and you use the terminology which is fantastic, of the old ways. It's understanding and living within the rhythm of the world around us, which we've so forgotten. We've so forgotten how to read nature and be in nature and really be part of it, haven't we?
Yeah, and it goes back to how they dress as well. And this is something that I've come to understand through the Pixie, the artwork I've channeled through, and how they dress. And this artist I was speaking to said exactly the same thing. She said, because I said, "Oh, how were they dressed?" And she described it. She said, "Well, kind of, it was, traditional sort of cloth, very natural colours." And she said, "Yeah," she said, "they're representing the old ways. They're representing those times that we're moving too far away from, where life was a lot simpler. All right, there's lots of things we didn't have, like all of the mod cons that we've got that do help us, like the National Health Service, stuff like that. But we were living much more closely with the land. So it's almost the way that they are showing themselves are in that dress before the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's that time when things made, like you say, we had the crafts, things were made more traditionally. Cloth was woven by hand. It wasn't imported and, from sweatshops all around the world. It was very much more simpler, kinder to the planet way of life. And I really feel that's what they're reminding us of, whoever these beings are. Because we don't really know, do we? That's a whole other question.
Yes, it is. It is, definitely.
They're representing this. Come on, guys. Remember this time when you were much more in harmony with the planet? That's what I get anyway from.
And I totally agree. And I think that we often as human beings see ourselves as separate entities from the environment. But, the fact that there is such disrespect for the environment, chucking rubbish is one thing, but there are so many different issues, so many greater issues, and so many rumbling on that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger that are taking us away, that we see ourselves as separate entities. And I do believe that in modern day sort of anxieties and depressions and is because we are so insulated within our own selves that we don't see ourselves in the natural rhythm of things. I mean, I love it when specifically doctors say, you need more sunlight, and it's like, no shit, that's we are nature. We do need to go out and have at least sort of 5 hours worth of sunlight to be able to raise our own serotonin levels naturally. And I mean, I know one thing for me, I started foraging in earnest. I've been doing it on and off, but during lockdown, like a lot of people, foraging became a real passion. And the things that I found about myself and my own connection with nature is time. Time doesn't exist. You've been in a woodland for 20 minutes. And your 3 hours have gone, and you've moved a very small patch because you've been going, oh, look at this, what's this berry, what's this mushroom, and just being outside of yourself, is the ultimate meditation. We spend so much money on gurus and tapes and videos to give us that experience that we can go and do it in our nearest natural environment. But I mean, that it's bigger than that, because our effects do affect these vibrational beings massively, and we often forget that it is their world too, and our interactions really affect them, don't they?
It does. I mean, it's happening everywhere, isn't it? I can only speak for this sort of area, this patch here that I'm living in, where there's been so much since I've been living where I live in Devon. In the last 10 years, there's been so much new houses built around here. And there's been times when they were building this new housing estate where there's this beautiful old oak tree in the middle of the field. And I was like, oh no, please don't remove that tree. And they've left it, thank goodness. But they've built around it, and they're doing all the groundworks, and I was feeling it in my body. I was feeling like, oh, this place needs some healing. And it comes down to as well. I think we're all in where we are living for a particular reason, and I've certainly come here for a reason, because I was like, oh, why am I living on this housing estate? And then during lockdown, a friend said to me, why don't you putting, some plants in your garden, because it's a rented house. I just had a lawn back and front. So I've planted it out with trees and rose bushes and herbs, and it's only a tiny patch. But it's amazing the wildlife that started to come in the last couple of years. And I feel like, well, that's something small that I've done to help change the vibration of this place. And we can all do that, can't we in some way, even if it's just going and visiting a tree and giving it some positive thoughts. There are all these things that we can do, and it's just like you say, it's noticing, really taking time to notice. And that's when we come back to ourselves, and that's when we come into contact with the fairy realm as well, if we want to open our hearts to that.
Definitely. And I mean some people find it quite a difficult concept, and quite I suppose the vibrational elements of trees and plants and whatever else. But I mean, these things are being more and more scientifically proven, if you like, within those sciences. Not that you kind of, when you don't need that kind of proof, but the connection that we all have and the interplay. And recently science has discovered, not that we didn't know this in the first place, that trees actually communicate with each other, and they do that through mycelial network of mushrooms, and they communicate very complex things like years of disease and drought, and how to keep themselves safe. And one fascinating element of that is even tree stumps that we see that look like they are dead trees. Other trees will keep them alive because they are information centers. So we may talk from a fairy perspective about these things being them as important as the energy that we receive back, but it's scientifically there. It's we know that if we put bad energy into a plant, we know that plant will probably die or become diseased or not grow as well as a plant that we put in positive energy to. That is not rocket science. It's not rocket science. And the fairy realm do come and are, I think, gathering up to this heyday of wanting to be heard and wanting to push forward, and they want to tell us what's how to be and which direction to go.
I really feel that. I mean, we can only go, I suppose, on our own experiences with talking to people that are coming forward. I mean, I know this isn't mainstream, and there are a lot of people that aren't engaging in these realms, but the more I put myself out there with my work and with what you do with your podcast, and obviously Joe's wonderful podcast here, the more people are coming forward and saying, well, actually, I've had an experience like that. And it all adds to this, I don't know, kind of melting pot of, it's all good, isn't it? It's all good. I mean, even if someone, I know people have difficult experiences as well, but it's just putting it out there that there's more to this world than what's shown to us on the 6 o'clock news. Not that I watch the 6 o'clock news, but there's and that's all good, because isn't it? It's bringing us back to ourselves, our true selves, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So that's it, isn't it? We've solved it.
Solved it.
We can go home. Shall we get back to the kind of top?
Yeah.
Because that was a brilliant meander, absolutely brilliant. Shall we get back to the top trump of gnomes? So I'm kind of going to give you a brief rundown of the traditional gnome.
Yes.
And we'll see where there's the crossovers of that. So very much the gnome that we know in Europe, and especially Northern Europe, is very Scandinavian based. So they do wear sort of colours of reds and blues and yellows, but they tend to be muted and very much look like they're from nature. So the reds are berry reds, and the blues that they have would probably come from cobalt, or that kind of thing. And they dress very traditionally in the males in tunics and in trousers and boots, made out of natural materials. So very much for workwear, it looks like good, decent workwear that you'd go out in. And the maiden gnomes often wear an apron to denote that they are baking or making and not wanting to get their clothes mucky. They're diminutive, so there are some aspects, some reporting on gnomes being very, very small. I mean, very, very small, 10, 12, 15 centimetres. General consensus, I think, is that they are taller than that, up to sort of 3 foot in height. They can be quite antisocial, I think, is a good way of saying it, with other fae folk and with humans, but definitely not antisocial with animals. They have I think probably one of the ultimate relationships of the whole fae realm with the animal world. There is a love and a bond with all animals. Apparently they're not so keen on spiders and snakes, but they don't bother them, and the snakes and spiders don't bother them back. And of course we know them as growers. They are great at growing. They live subterranean, but they don't live in the depths, so they're not like trolls or dwarfs, so they don't live in deep dwelling, but they do live in sort of dens and burrows in the ground. So that's kind of in a nutshell. So have we got any crossovers there for your understanding of pixies?
Yeah, the clothing. Do all gnomes wear pointy hats?
So the traditional depiction is of that, and I went to Three Wishes this year, Fairy Festival, and I'd never thought about it before, but I went as a gnome, so I was team gnome there, and I had a very big conical hat on, and somebody came up to me and said, "Why do you have such a big hat, gnome?" And I said, "It's to hide the fact that I've got a very big brain." But it just came out of my mouth, but I have no idea, why that conical hat. My only thought is because of the Scandinavian, Northern European connection, and this is just off the top of my head, and somebody please correct me, is because it would dispel snow or rain, which could sort of, clump on top, but I could be completely wrong. It could be because they've got massive brains, or it could be because it's a great place to put baby birds. I don't know.
Love it. Yeah, so pixies, it's funny, the woman, coming back to this artist I was talking about the other day, she's seen the pixie she saw, the female pixie was wearing an apron. And she's seen a male pixie wearing an apron as well, very basic apron, that he was hammering something, hammering a rock for some reason. So she heard him before she saw him, and they were both wearing aprons. But the pixie I saw, I tend to think, people have seen them in various forms. So some people have seen them dressed in rags. Some people have seen them naked or wearing hardly anything. There's a pixie sighting up at Haytor in the 1950s where a woman was up there with her son. It's a very hot day, and I've forgotten her name. Sorry, I haven't got that in front of me. But she saw a little man, and it was as if he came out of the rocks, and he was dressed in like a smock, brown smock, tied at the waist with a piece of cord. That very sort of old-fashioned, very traditional way of dress, very simple way of dress. They can appear in, people have seen them around Widdicombe, dressed in like blue and red, or red and green. They live in various places on Dartmoor. So they're said to like living by the water, or at least they like to dance by the water, by streams. They like to dance on top of the tors, which are the rocky outcrops on Dartmoor. They like meadows where they dance and create grass rings, or they like to dance in circles of toadstools. So they love their singing and dancing, and they're known for their music. They live in caves. So there's a cave up on Dartmoor called the Pixies Cave, up on one of the tors. They're said to have their palaces under tors as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they come up and dance in the moonlight. They love to dance in the moonlight. So they've got, the sounds of things, they've got a bit of a different vibe to gnomes.
Maybe gnomes are just the antisocial cousins of the pixies.
Maybe, yeah. and they're also known to live in mines as well. So in Cornwall, the pixies in the mines, they're called knockers.
Mm-hmm.
And there are also pixies that are said to be in the mines up on Dartmoor as well. But they, in some stories, they are more darker in nature, not, very goblin-like. And there's a story that the above ground pixies and the mine pixies, the goblin-y pixies, had a battle on Dartmoor. So yeah, it's
I mean, there is a crossover there, because there's also in the mythology of or the history of gnomes, it is cited that knockers could actually be gnomes as well. So there is that crosses. There's that crossover of, are they hobs? Are they goblins? And again, it's this can't sort of pin it down of where one starts and another one ends. And I mean, it does raise lots of questions. And one of the things that we spoke about just before we started recording again was we were starting to talk about, is there an evolution within the fairy realm? Do clans, do specific fairies change and evolve? So starting off, it could be that we've got an historical view that is a gnome, but actually they've evolved beyond what we have got some kind of grasp onto. And it's the same with the pixies. Have they grown into being what we know as a traditional pixie? It's a fascinating subject, isn't it? Do they evolve?
It is. We were talking about this briefly, weren't we? And I think they, whoever they are, they're definitely part of this wider consciousness. Excuse me. I feel that they're evolving with us, in that, I mean, they're beyond us in many, many ways, in the way that they can come in and out of our reality and live in this other reality, but also on the edges of our reality. I feel that they can interact with our technology. And we've kind of experienced that, haven't we, on an episode that we recorded for my podcast a while ago, and we had little orbs flying around.
Yeah.
Which often happens around you, but you said that's gone quiet at the moment.
I did see one right at the very beginning, and I was like,
did you? Oh, wow. So, and I've spoken, I've got an upcoming, I don't know how many episodes it's going to be. It might be a couple of episodes, where I went to speak to a woman in Sussex about anomalies that she's captured on her cameras in her garden, on her Ring cameras, which are very interesting and very, very difficult to pin these things down. So I feel that they can. And in my experience of taking photographs and seeing things in my photographs and thinking, well, okay, I know about pareidolia, but that is very convincingly looks like something. Looks like a little person or a face. So I think it's that trickster element where they want to keep us guessing. What do you feel? I don't think we'll ever know exactly.
I don't know whether our evolution is spurred on by those realms, or it's the other way around, that we have influence on their realms. But I tell you one thing that does spring to mind for me is I always have a massive bugbear about fairy music in particular. So we always go back to this sound of harps or bells, very sort of medieval-esque type music that comes from the fairy realm. Now, for me, the fairies are as much, 21st century as we are artists out there who I listen to modern artists and I just think they are fae. They are fae. And it's often, I mean, to start with, it was there was a lot of sort of acid jazz that was going off, which was very sort of chaotic but melodical and beautiful, female voices over the top, which for me was just like this for me resonates as fae. It's got this really complex cacophony going off, and then the very sort of light. So I genuinely believe that they are evolving, and I mean they are the great mimics. We know that the whole fairy realm is absolutely known for mimicking humans and loving mimicking humans. They find great hilarity in some of the shenanigans that we get up to. They find it very amusing that we have 9-to-5 jobs, and that we wear ties and starch shirts and that kind of thing. And there are stories, and I can't remember, there's a beautiful story that I read about, and I think it was a group of pixies who would spend their time watching the human realm and then coming back to the pixie clan and literally doing little plays about the ridiculous things that human beings did, to which they would all roll about in stitches, But when you think about some of the things we do as humans, setting alarm clocks, things like that, it is amusing.
Yeah, and without getting too deep into the spectrum-y stuff, but I consider myself on the spectrum, and I've got children, especially my daughter who's on the spectrum, and that is one of her questions, like, Mum, why, that she asked me a few years ago, why do you always open the curtains in the morning? Like when she'd gone to school, I thought, I'll just open the curtains.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? It's like, oh yeah. And that's I think that's how fairies think. It's like this kind of, why do people do those things? It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they do find us funny.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think that they spend, I think there are fairies who spend a lot of time sort of watching us for different kinds of reasons. But I think that they also, I mean, where, you have the old tales of, the Irish fiddler who's taken off into fairyland, he comes back and he fiddles differently and in a way that nobody has done before. I think that's vice versa as well. I think, the fairy world will watch us and to see, new instruments that we make in music, new painting techniques, new crafts and stuff. And I think in inspiration, it's that whole going back to the theory of the muses, the first muses being linked in with the fairy realm. As much as they are our muses, we are their muses, and I think it is a side-by-side relationship. I think the fact that the clothes are still very natural, I think that's what we've spoken about. That speaks volumes about their attunement with nature. But I think there's other aspects that they will definitely take and move forward. I would be really interested actually to find out if anybody out there has ever heard fairy music that's not that traditional sort of medieval, medieval type music.
Yeah, I've had a few musical hearing music and singing that I felt was fae, but it was quite traditional. And I'm a harpist, and I've also, been to places, gone past places, and then a tune's come to me from, for example, a woodland, and I felt that is a way of channeling fairy music that I've then been able to play on my harp. Quite simple little tunes that you can imagine fairies, pixies dancing to, sort of doo-loo-loo, that kind of thing. And I've been with my son on Dartmoor a few years ago, 2021, and we were stood by this. I was just drawn to walk to this rock. I mean, these experiences they always come with other like intuitive feelings. It's not just you hear the sound. It's always a lead up to it. That's what I've found. I don't know if you feel the same.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so we're at this little tour on Dartmoor near Widdicombe, and I said, before we go home, I'd like to walk over to that rock. And being teenagers, they're like, oh, why do you want to walk over to that rock? Because I just feel I want to, just for some reason. So we went and stood by this rock, and my son was stood next to me, and he said, oh, Mum, I can hear fluty music. And I said, really? And he's got brilliant hearing.
Mm-hmm.
I said, and I listened and listened. I said, oh, yeah, I could hear it too. Now, this is a rock in the middle of Dartmoor. There's no one around for miles that I could see. There's Widdicombe in the distance, a couple of miles, well, about a mile or so away, but and there's, a bit of a wind. So it's too far to hear someone playing a musical instrument, surely. Mm-hmm. There could have been someone hidden down in the ferns somewhere behind some rocks playing a flute. But yeah, so it's really strange. One of those bizarre, unexplained experiences. And yeah, and I've heard singing as well. I would say that's more sort of mermaid singing. I was in a cove, staying in a cove for a weekend in a little cottage, and I was meditating, and this song came to me, and I hummed this song. I was singing this song to the sea, and then I recorded it on my recorder, this song. And then I played it back, and as I was playing it back, the song was coming back to me, like someone was singing it back to me. It's really beautiful. It's like this call and return that was going on. Yeah, there's more to the experience than that, but it was, yeah, I've had a few experiences like that where, with music and sound.
Again, though, I do wonder whether that is that they are giving over like a coded experience, if you like. So it's coded that that it can't be coming from a distant car or a distant town because it's not got that modern edge to it, and maybe that's part of why we hear the harps and the flutes and sometimes the bagpipes and that kind of thing. I mean, in my chaotic mind, I actually see modern pixies as definitely the ravers. They are, they would be big that kind of audio experience. That's maybe what I would experience because I'm kind of expecting that to be the case. So maybe it is on expectations. The only audio that I've had, and I've had this quite a few times, is where I've been walking in various different places, obviously, natural places, and I've had what sounds like a swarm of 1,000,000 bees.
Oh, right, yes.
And it's huge noise. And every time I've been with somebody else, at least one other person, and I've almost ducked, expecting this swarm to like come straight over our head, to which, it's the conversation goes along the lines of, what's the matter? And I'm like, can you not hear that?
Right.
And nobody I've ever been with has heard what I've heard. And it is so loud. It's not tinnitus. It sounds like bees. Now, I didn't know that was connected with the Fae until I read a couple of accounts in Marjorie Johnson's Seeing Fairies, where other people had that experience. So, yeah, that was a bit mad. Definitely.
Yeah, I've heard about that from another person that has written about fairy magic. He's a fairy witch doctor. I did a workshop with him a few years ago. Orion Foxwood.
I know Orion Foxwood's work. Yeah. I don't know him, but I know his work. I do find his work fascinating.
Really powerful stuff. And he was talking about the hosting, the gathering of the fairies, like a swarm of bees. like you're describing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely potent stuff. I mean, going back to the pixies and the gnomes, and one thing that I did think of when I was thinking about things that we may talk about on this chat. I've just had another one. Go back a little. So one of the things that I think about was, are these things egregorial? So are these things like, if it is that Paracelsus has termed gnomes, let's just take it as verbatim that he made the term gnomes. He put them as the element of earth, and he said that they were the most important of the elements because the element of earth is connected directly to human beings. So here's this very sort of who has influence within the world of alchemy and magic, and still pertains to have that kind of oversight over alchemy and magic. He's termed them gnomes and said that they are gnomes that exist under the element of earth. So it's egregorial. He spoke that out into the universe. And with that, people around him at the time and, in the future, moving forward, but historically, have said the element of earth is gnomes. So more and more people are projecting this idea into the world. So with this projection building, so we know that egregores start off as a thought, like a tulpa, start off with a thought. Is that these things can then disconnect from that powerful thought and become sentient. That's another, and it's the same with pixies. Did they start off as just another name for fairy, for the overall? Yeah. And over time, because we have had little bits that have made us think they are a separate sort of race of fairies, that they now are. So it's that evolution, but is it a thought? I had when I was thinking about.
I really feel that our consciousness is directing how we're seeing them. Definitely. Yes. Yeah, it's very much
but
so.
Are we are we not only directing how we see them, but are we actually birthing them? Through our energy and our consciousness, are we birthing them? So egregores are usually attached to witchcraft and alchemy, and they are birthed to look after a coven or after a witch attached to that, and then they can become sentient and detach and be their own entity. Could it be that we are birthing or have birthed over history more faith? Just a thought.
I feel that's a real possibility. I really do. Gosh, without getting into the whole realm of everyone's beliefs, but it's like people having the Virgin Mary experiences and seeing Bigfoot and all the other forms of paranormal or whatever. It's are all these things from our consciousness, from our, like you say, they're birthed from us to serve some kind of purpose for our evolution. I think that's
a massive concept, isn't it?
It's massive.
My brain's just going.
I know.
Like that, that fits into the holographic universe theory, string theory, blah 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 blah, and it's like, it is a mind blowing concept, though, isn't it? And definitely one to explore. So probably somebody way cleverer than me will explore that one.
I think so, yeah. And didn't we have as well we're going to share some experiences, weren't we?
Yes, let's do it.
Time to do that. I'll just quickly show you. This is, funnily enough, I've got a little pixie
that's gorgeous.
Is playing a flute with his owl.
That's super cute. So do you want to have a chat? I know that we are both big fans of Simon Young's Fairy Census.
Yes.
And the first, the second part of the first Fairy Census is now out and available. And Simon is going to make me a very poor woman at the rate he's going by putting out publications and by also suggesting publications. But when we're looking at different people's experiences, modern experiences of pixies. Is there anyone in there that really stands out for you?
Yeah, so like you said, this is from the 2014 to 2017 census, and Simon's about to publish the next one, isn't he? It's about to happen. So
I'm not saying anything because every time I say it, apparently Simon gets really, really guilt-riddled. I've got no idea why I've become his conscious voice. I'm like his Jiminy Cricket. So Simon's doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, and if there's anyone listening to this or watching this that's had a fairy experience, or even has a friend or relative that's had one, you can submit that to the census on www.fairyist.com, isn't it? So it's
yes,
FAIRYIST.com. And you can do that anonymously.
Anonymous. You've got me doing it now. Anonymously. You can do it without anybody knowing your name. That's what we're trying to say.
Okay, I love this one. So this is from 1990. It's a male that reported this. Happened between 9 p.m. and 12 a.m. in Cornwall, and it was in August or September around 1991. Whilst driving down a country road with hedgerows either side, travelling at a speed of 45 to 50 miles per hour, something compelled me to look into the hedgerow. I saw a brown, leathery-skinned, very angry-looking old man standing about 2.5 feet high. I don't know why this is making me giggle. I think it's because it reminds me of my experience of these angry pixies shaking their fists. I saw a brown, leathery-skinned, very angry-looking old man standing about 2.5 feet high, completely naked apart from a loincloth-type clothing. He was pointing right at me with his index finger. What happened in an instant seemed to last forever. I then braked sharply, only to realise the road was falling sharply towards a sea wall. If I hadn't braked, I would have driven over the sea wall and over the cliff face, as I was not on the road. I thought I was. I had my then wife and baby son in the car with me. I consider this pixie to have saved our lives. It was about 2.5 feet tall, with brown leathery type skin, an old-looking face with a hooked nose and large ears. He was bald or had very little hair. He had noticeably large hands. There was no music, but there was a definite silence in the surrounding air. Its appearance was of something that would be described in a nursery rhyme. I just seemed to know what it was upon seeing it. These events of that night have and will stay with me forever. It did frighten me enough to not want to see another. I don't know what fairies are. So that is an interesting...
It is. I mean, the whole census is super interesting. And the fact that he said that he didn't want to see another and he was fearful is incredibly interesting. I took Simon's book I took it to do a talk at a paranormal weekend, and I read probably a dozen accounts out of the book, and told none of the guests what the book was. I just said that these are experiences that people have had, and I asked them to give me feedback on each one about what they thought had happened. Now, not one person in the audience said that was a fairy encounter. They all said that it was alien, or that it was ghost, or it was cryptozoology, or they said it was a time slip. And when I told them that they were all fairy encounters, they were shocked. They were absolutely shocked, because there is that quite frightening element. However, the known ones that are in the census, there is only, I think that there's less than half a dozen known encounters that made it into the census, that people have actually said these are gnomes that have gone in there. and I think there's 2, there may be 3, I may be wrong. I had another flick through today, but I may be wrong, that have happened in Nottingham. Now, yeah, this is interesting. So you showed my book earlier. So I've been researching with Joe and with Neil Rushton, and sort of hopping off some research that started off with Dr. Simon Young and Dan Green, which then accumulated into this book, which is The Woollerton Gnomes.
Oh, yes.
Which is a series of essays. Mine's in there, which I'm very proud of. So I'd been doing some research into that. I'm from Nottingham. I actually live in Nottingham, and I'm not that far away from Woollerton Hall. And it was really interesting that I don't know. I don't think it's a colloquial thing. I don't think it's specific to Nottingham that people are calling them gnomes. I think it's more an energetic imprint. So because that story was so incredible, so heavily publicised in terms of, in modern day, I don't think there's another fairy story that surpasses it in modern times. As in, Marjorie Johnson herself went and investigated it. So there's such an imprint that people would use, even if it's subconsciously they've heard it, would use the term gnomes. Now, when you talk about the last one that you read out, there would be part of me saying, why would somebody call that a pixie? Because actually I would be more inclined to think more gnome, or, because of the wrinkled skin. And so it's wet. Again, we're kind of butting up, aren't we?
Is it because, like you say, is it because this person was in Cornwall, where they have the piskies and pixies and this part of the world, and thought, well, that's what it must be, because there are pixies down here. So
yeah,
if he was in Nottingham, for example, and had that experience, would he think it was a gnome?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and they're not just in Nottingham, they are in and around Woollerton Park itself, that the subsequent encounters took place. And there has been, in seeing fairies as well, the gnome encounters seem to be centred around Nottingham and Woollerton Park. There is a story of a child who encountered something that she called a pixie, that she described very, very differently to the gnomes in Woollerton Park as well. So lots of different stories come out of that place on very, very different levels. It's such an interesting space. But
yeah, and I saw the video that Joe and you and Neil filmed.
Yeah.
While you were up there, and that was fascinating. And you had a psychic with you. Sorry, I've forgotten his name.
Glenn. Yeah, lovely Glenn.
Yeah, and he was tapping into different areas, wasn't he, in the trees? And I thought that was brilliant. It's so important. I mean, that's why I'm going to these places that are associated with pixies, because which has taken me some time to do, because some of these places are quite remote. But I felt it's really important to go to these places that are mentioned in folklore, where people have had these experiences, if you can, to see what you can pick up yourself, to understand the environment, what was there before, what's the history, but more importantly, what is your experience? Because everybody will have a different experience or idea about what fairies are. And I think it's really important we all come to our own conclusions, isn't it? And have our own experiences in these places.
I couldn't agree more. I think I think even though I had been to Woollerton as a youngster, gone into the park as a youngster, when I first started, I was asked on board with the research that was taking place for Simon's book. I hadn't been back since I was a kid, and I'd got very, very vague recollection of, it was just a lake and a deer park. Going back with and understanding that I had to look at it in a very different way gave me a very different connection to the place. One thing that was interesting, I'll just mention this very briefly, that didn't transpire on the video that Joe put out of the Wollertons outing that we did, was one of the trees that Glenn Bodice actually pointed us towards and said there's a malevolent energy there. I think it's the ghost hunting side of me. I'm like, why are you telling us to stay away? Come on, don't tell us that, because I'm just going to beeline. And the tree that he was saying that there's this really angry, and it was pixie-esque, I think he described it, trying to back us off from this particular fallen tree. So I was straight in there. I was like, sod off, I want to investigate. I actually found a geocache. So inside the tree where people had left, there was 2 keyrings, Wollerton Park keyrings, that we exchanged. We put something back in that geocache. And I was thinking, now, was that energy protecting the treasure that was the geocache?
Oh, yes.
And it was saying, back off, this treasure's mine, because it had got a little stash of treasure in the tree. It was lovely. It was a lovely moment.
Yeah, because obviously, well, that's another commonality, isn't it, between gnomes and pixies?
Yes.
All fairies, this connection with treasure and minerals, crystals, gold, the silver, tin. And they're protective of that.
They are, and they're like little magpies, aren't they? Hence why we put out ribbons and bash coins into dead trees and things like that. It's because they do like shiny things and pretty things, and we'll squirrel them away like a hoard of gold and be very protective of them.
Yeah, and something I've just thought of actually.
So interesting concept.
Talking about roots of names, there's various ideas about where the name pixie comes from. So there's pucker, puck, which is another old name for fairies, and also pix is now in our modern world, isn't it? Because it's part of the whole AI computers. We have pixels. Pix just means a small thing, and the word pix was used in Devon as well. It was to leave some of the apples or fruit on a tree after harvesting the apples in the autumn. So they'd always leave picks for the fairies. So there's also that connection as well, but it means like a small thing. And now that's translated into our modern world. So this fairy term has become part of our AI and computers. That's a really interesting way that they've come into our modern consciousness as well.
And they do. I mean, they come through all kinds of computer games. The concepts of that realm of elves and dwarves, and modern films, and they're not going to go away anytime soon. And I think they're infiltrating all over the place, really. I think we need to wrap up, because Joe's going to go nuts if we run this into a 2-hour. But one of the things the things that we were going to leave it, and I want to leave on this note, right, because it's another mind blower. We were chatting about whether there could be interracial relationships between the Fae, and is that something that could happen, and that's something where these crossovers come from. And I think leaving it hanging on, the sexual activity of the Fae is a really to say to Joe, thank you very much for having us along. And I hope we've behaved ourselves.
Oh gosh, the mind boggles now. I'm just no. I don't want to see that.
No, it's too much. Look away.
Oh gosh. Do you want to just share anything that's coming up for you going forward, Kate, that you want to share, or you can share at the moment?
Divert quickly. So I can't think of anything now. So obviously, carrying on doing Hare in the Hawthorn. So that's myself and Neil Rushton, who present Hare in the Hawthorn, which is a broad look at fairies, but within the Fortean context. So we also look at other subject matter, but always try and bring it back to that root base of the fairies. I am still writing. I write for Haunted Magazine, and I write a lot of the time about fairies and their connection with the paranormal, particularly, and the darker side of the fae. So that's often a subject matter for me. I am tentatively sloshing around ideas for several other books. Sort of moving on with that. Later on in the year, I'm doing a couple of conferences. Fairy related conferences where I'm going to be going and speaking. One of those is the Earth Mysteries conference up in Blackpool. I'm also doing a couple of paranormal ones. There's probably 101 things, but I can't think off the top of my head. So how about you, Claire?
I'm taking some of the summer off to focus on finishing my book. So I've set myself a timeline to finish that by the end of the year. My Pixies book, because I've got illustrations to do for that as well. As you know, with your beautiful illustrations, that all takes time as well. So we're working on that. I've also got ideas for other books after that, but I need to get this one finished first. I'm working on series 2 of Fairy Whispering podcast. I find it very hard to take time off from the podcast, but I've decided because of some holidays and things, I'm going to have August as a break and come back in September with some new wonderful guests I've got coming on. I've spoke to somebody who's seen a fairy market on their windowsill. I've got loads of interesting guests coming on in the autumn from September. Apart from that, I'm working on my fairy art, and I'm also offering people to help them to work with plants and land. So something I do is I help people with areas of land that need healing, and I can do that from a distance as well. So that's all on my website, which I guess that'll all be in the notes for this show, but it's fairywhisperer.co.uk. I spell fairy F-A-E-R-Y.
As it should be. It should be.
Thank you to you, Kate, and it's been wonderful to co-host this with you. The time just flown by, hasn't it? And
absolutely.
And I hope Joe's happy with what we've done.
I think we've been very well behaved.
We have, yeah.
It's not been mutiny. It's not been, it was dropping into mutiny, but I'm sure she'll understand.
Yeah. There's probably loads more we could have spoken about, but okay. Lots of love to you, Kate, and to everyone listening.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's been a brilliant chat, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. And thanks to Joe as well for allowing us to have a little bit of free reign, quite a lot of free reign actually, to discuss stuff. So thank you everybody for listening, and please enjoy.
Okay, bye for now.